All right, welcome back to another live. I'm your host, Joseph Lewin, and today I am excited to be joined by Chris Cirillo. Chris is the founder of Mission Fit Dads, and his business, he's primarily focusing on busy Christian business leaders, but he's going to be sharing with us a lot today about some of the challenges that entrepreneurs or business leaders face when it comes to how to create healthy habits or rewiring your brain to create healthy habits. So even though his business is primarily focusing on helping Christian men with that, with creating these healthy habits, the things he has to share really apply to anybody that wants to make a change in their life. They've got something going on that's a challenge, and they want to break out of bad habits and create healthy habits. So Chris, welcome to the show. Really excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. Glad to be here, and I'm excited too. I think this is going to be really helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah, so we're just going to kick off with, why do you believe that so many entrepreneurs or business leaders struggle to create healthy habits?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think just primarily because there's probably everyone listening to this has struggled at some point or is currently struggling with developing some kind of habit. I know that even myself being a coach, there's moments where I'm still working through, and like we are a consistent work in progress. And so I think it's a really great question. So for starters, I think one of the greatest challenges is probably just wrong expectations. I think people just don't fully understand what it requires to build good habits, and I think uh, a lot of people will subconsciously just think that habits are going to just happen on their own, right? And there's not a lot of intentionality or planning or consistency in their execution. And then I think one of the other things is reflection and how's it going and iteration and those kinds of things. And the ability to just be uncomfortable for long enough to change something that you want to change so that it becomes comfortable again. I think we love comfort. And if we aren't willing to become uncomfortable to develop a habit and then become comfortable again in that new normal, then we end up just shy of actually developing things that are lasting. Um, I think another reason that this is challenging for a lot of people is we often try to build good habits without addressing the bad ones as well. And
Hmm.
so if you think about habits like a road or maybe a well-worn path, right? You're walking through the forest and you've walked it so many times that there's a path. And it's really easy to walk down that path now because you've gone down that over and over again. And it's not just creating a new path, because then there's two equivalent pathways to walk. We've got to be really intentional to actually like forge a road and to create something that's so easy and so compelling to go down that we don't even recognize that that other path is still there. Because one of the things that researchers are learning is that habits don't necessarily go away. We actually just create different ones that are more powerful and more compelling for our brain to default to.
Hmm.
And so if we are trying to create a new habit without addressing, maybe putting a roadblock in front of the one that was our old habit, that well-worn path, something as a deterrent, and that comes to how we structure our environment and things like that, then it's really easy to go back to it. So creating new habits requires also dealing with the old ones and then comparing those two properly. One of the other aspects here is not understanding the habit loop. And so some people here might be familiar with this terminology, but the habit loop is basically you have a cue, something in your environment that triggers you, and what it's doing is triggering a craving, and that craving is causing you to want a particular reward, and in between the craving and the reward is the action. So
Hmm.
the habit cycle is cue or trigger, craving, action, and then reward. And the more that you do that cycle, the more ingrained it becomes in your brain, because our brains love things being automatic. We want to save energy and make things really automatic. And so if we don't understand how to actually craft that cycle for a new habit and how to disrupt that cycle for a bad habit, then it becomes really challenging to do. It's a lot of willpower. and willpower, as most of us know, is fleeting
Yeah.
and will only last us so long. And the last two pieces I'll say, just on how people often struggle, is most people make their habits too big. And so it's like, oh, I want to change this thing. So it's like I go straight to the ideal rather than starting
Mm,
with something small that we can build off of over time. So, what's the smallest, the most viable action that you can take that is going to begin to develop a habit? And then how do you build on that over time? And then I think specifically, this one most people probably won't like to hear, but for business leaders, business owners, entrepreneurs, executive level people, I think that subconsciously people idolize their work and their career successes. They become workaholics, which then becomes a habitual state of mind that actually is a habit in and of itself. And that
mm.
conflicts with all of the other personal health habits, relational habits with our spouse, our kids, and so many other things. And so I think that's a really, really powerful one, especially for people that find a lot of identity in their work. It becomes really challenging to overcome that one, particularly to build healthy habits physically, spiritually, relationally, so on.
Yeah, that's you covered a lot of ground, so I want to just kind of in on a couple of things. I mean, one thing is like I'm going to use an extreme example here just because I think it illustrates some of the points of what you're saying. It's like, okay, if my normal is I wake up in the morning and I sit down on the couch and I scroll on TikTok for an hour, that's obviously a bad habit to have as the
Mhm.
first thing that I'm going to do in the morning. And then if I one day wake up and I go, I want to run a marathon, and then I go out to try to run a marathon one day, I'm going to completely fail at that, right? And then the
Yes.
next morning, that urge to sit down on the couch, maybe one morning I wake up and I'm like, I'm going to change my life. I'm going to go run, right? And I go, okay, I'm going to run 26 miles today. Let's go. Totally going to fail. And the reason I'm using that as an extreme example is, man, one day of trying to do that, I'm going to get like a half a mile and I'm going to feel totally burnt out. I'm going to feel defeated. I'm not going to have a positive experience or positive reward associated with that. So I'm going to wake up the next morning or maybe 2 or 3 mornings later and I'm going to pick up my phone and I'm just going to automatically kind of find myself sitting on the couch scrolling again because I'm getting a dopamine reward from that. Whereas trying to run 26 miles at once is not going to work at all. So if I wanted to break that down and actually create a healthy habit, there's, from what you shared, a lot of things that I would need to do differently, doing things to make it more difficult for me to start that bad habit of scrolling on TikTok in the morning is something to figure out and address. But then also breaking down running a marathon into much smaller steps and, having my shoes laid out the night before and saying, hey, I'm just going to get out and walk to the end of my driveway and back on day one,
Yes.
and kind of create it. And like every day that I go out and do this, I'm going to reward myself by doing XYZ or, create something that I'm gonna not drink my coffee until I've gone out and done that thing, and my reward for doing it is now I get to drink my cup of coffee or whatever that is. So I mean, I'll let you kind of dive in a little bit more, but I think that
Yeah.
extreme example kind of paints the picture a little bit of what we're getting at.
The nonprofit, and his name is John Mark Comer. And I love the way that he describes this. And I don't think this was new. I don't think this is his intellectual property per se, but he talks about it a lot. He says there's trying and then there's training, and there's a vast difference. And to your point, Joseph, like he makes the remark that trying is the person that gets up and says, I'm going to try to run 26 miles today, versus training is the person that, has never run and says, I'm going to start with 1 mile and then next week 2 and the week after 3. And I'll build up over 6 months to 26 miles. And suddenly you become the type of person who can run a marathon over time if you start with the proper kind of like training or practice methods rather than going straight to the ideal.
Yeah, that's huge, and it actually kind of brings up. I'm going to go slightly off topic and then get us back because we're both involved with 1,000 houses, which is like group that's helping to teach families how to operate more effectively and with discipleship and things like that. And what you said just made me think of, I was at an event last night and we were talking about training your kids. And, it's kind of the same idea where most people think of their kids as being a liability to their family and not an asset. And it's like, okay, I'm going to
Mhm.
expend all of this energy on my kid and there's not really going to be any return. But that's thinking, you got to change the way that you think about that. But if you try to train your kids to do things that are actually helpful in your family, if you try to start with the end state, like, oh, it'd be super helpful if my son mowed the lawn every single week. And I'm just like thinking in state of, hey, I'm going to hand
Yes.
him the lawnmower, go out and mow the entire lawn. We got a 5.5 acre property, have fun. It's like that's not going to end very well. But if I
Yep.
find something really small that I can give him responsibility with, that's a lot easier. Maybe it's just like, hey, get these clippers and go prune this bush. I'm going to walk you through how to prune this bush. And once I see that he masters using this one tool with this one really small project, and we do that every day, the frustrating thing about that is you don't get that end state immediately and you don't get that end reward immediately, but that training aspect where you're focusing on these smaller pieces, in a week from now he's actually going to be able to go trim that bush and I'm not going to even have to think about it. And
Yep.
then 2 weeks later I'm going to be able to start teaching him how to mow the lawn and he's going to do half of it and it's going to take me twice as long while I train him. But then 3 weeks, 4 weeks down the line, he's going to be able to mow the lawn and I'm not even going to have to think about it again. And I think it's kind of gets to that same part of what you're talking about where it's trying versus training. Like trying to teach your kid how to mow the lawn is, hey, here's the mower, here's how you turn it on, have fun. Okay, I tried, it didn't work, he failed. See, I knew it'd be more difficult. My kid's not going to really be able to do that versus kind of training towards that and doing it slowly.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, can I share my screen here really quick, and I'll
Yeah.
add to this with one of my slides here. Um, so I think what you're describing is actually fit into this slide pretty well. So, like when I work with people, this seems basic, but if you think about the way Google Maps works, like if you don't have, if your phone isn't tethered to service and it doesn't have an accurate current location for you, it can't build the pathway to your desired location that you want to get to. You need
Mm,
both points. You need the grid coordinates for your current location and the destination in order to build the best kind of route. And so when people are thinking about habits or even kid training or anything where we're going from one place to some place that's better, we have to get really crystal clear on this. Like, what is the current state? And then what's the desired state? And then what's the path to get there? Because you can't take one step from the current state to the desired state, like you're talking about with training the kids. We can't go from kids been sitting on the couch to now I'm going to have my son mowing a 5 acre lawn. Like there's in between steps and there's a process to doing this. And this works the same for our own kind of habit formation and lifestyle design, really is like, okay, what's the life that I'm living now? What does it look like? Be really, really honest, brutally honest. And I think of um, the Stockdale paradox. I talk about this often with people. Stockdale paradox is used in business a lot, and it is this idea of confronting the brutal facts and doing so with relentless optimism. And so it's we have to be really transparent, honest, and clear about, quite frankly, how bad it is today and where we desire to get to. Because if we're honest about those two things, then we can build the right step by step pathway. But without that, you're unlikely to be able to create the success. So sometimes we deceive ourselves into thinking that we're better than we are. And then
mm.
it's harder to get where we want to go because we weren't honest enough and we can't build the right path. Or sometimes we're just ignoring the path altogether and forgetting the fact that we need a route, and we're trying to take that big step from honest current state to the ideal immediately.
Yeah, that's huge. If you can't figure out exactly where you are, but I think that is hard. I think that's hard for people. I mean, probably even more men in particular to really be honest about your current state, especially if there's something that's
Yeah.
you're not excited about. I think there's a lot of that's really challenging. Do you have any? I don't want to get too far off track here because I think we could, but do you have any recommendations for people who are struggling to just be super honest about where they're actually at and admit that they, have some things they need to work on?
Yeah, I would say the current pain of reality is always less than the future pain of reality if we don't confront today's reality. So if I'm unwilling to do the honest work today, it's just going to be 10 times harder and 10 times more painful down the road when it all actually breaks, like
Mhm.
when there's the ability to hide it and kind of just push it to the side and keep going is no longer possible. It's going to be way more painful than just going, okay, I got to be honest with where I'm at right now, and I got to figure out a plan. So, well,
Pay
one of the
now
things,
or pay later.
yeah,
Pay now or
exactly.
you pay later, and it's a lot worse to pay later.
And then I think sometimes people don't have a rubric to like actually evaluate themselves through. So I'll show one here that people who are watching, and I think we're going to put these worksheets and everything in the chat or wherever this lives, so people can grab them in the comments. So feel free to grab this, go do this exercise as you're listening to this. If you're listening to it later, just pause it and go through this. But take a moment to kind of grade yourself. And this is how I look at things with clients. There's this kind of pyramid of progressive, success when it comes to habits in our life. And at the top, obviously, we've got the peak, and that to me is like this is 1 year of consistency without gaps. And what I mean by that is essentially you're a high performer with your habits. That means you most often never miss twice. So it's like if you have a bad day, that's okay. You just start again tomorrow. And if you're doing that consistently for over a year, then you're in a great spot with that particular habit. 8 months of consistent with no gaps is like the next step down. Again, the kind of grading here is: are you going multiple days without consistency in a particular habit? And then I would say the bottom three, you have inconsistent good habits, meaning you attempt to do good things, but maybe you go for a few weeks and then you fall off for a few weeks, or you do a couple of months and then you fall off for a couple of months. Um, the next one down, inconsistent good habits. So it's the exact same criteria as the one above, but also adding in the fact that I now have all of these other bad habits that are very consistent. And so
Mm.
I'm trying to, and this is kind of what we talked about at the beginning. I'm trying to create these good habits, and they are competing against a variety of bad habits that I'm not addressing. And then the bottom is just everything's out of control. And this doesn't mean that your life looks chaotic. It just means that you don't have control over your habits. You do what you don't want to do, and you don't do what you want to do. And that's a really, I think, painful place to be. So take a moment right now as you're reading this and just think about your life as a whole, those who are listening or watching. And with your life as a whole, where do you land on this? So if you've got one habit that's healthy, that's at the very top, but most of them are in the middle or at the bottom, then grade yourself accordingly, right? Because one habit that's good, like I run 3 times a week consistently, but I also drink way too much. I eat a bunch of crappy food. I don't sleep very often. I work too much. I have bad relationships. Like that's going to push your average down below. So take a moment, assess yourself, and then I'll show you guys kind of how I grade this in terms of what's good, what's moderate, what's bad, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think this is a super helpful rubric, maybe even a little bit convicting for me.
I mean, that's the goal. It's convicting for me at times too. And as long as we continue to be honest about certain aspects of where we're at, then that's good. Like we can move forward that way. So here's how I would grade this for you guys. If you're in the top two, you're green. If you're in the bottom three, you're in the red. In my opinion, this is very binary. This is not something that is, there's not, in my opinion, like a great middle ground, right? Like if you don't have consistency with healthy habits, then they're not actually long-term lasting habits. And this is why you see people that even go through a weight loss program and they lose, a bunch of weight maybe in 90 days or
Yep.
120 days or something like that. And over the course of the next year, 90% of those people gain all of their weight back plus some. And the
Mm.
reason is because they were willpower white knuckling towards a result rather than developing habits. And that's why this line in the middle is very clear that it's the consistency over time that is the indicator of success in these
Mm.
particular areas, not necessarily whether or not you have behaviors that are producing good results, at least in the short term.
Yeah, and I would say something is you can have a high degree of success in certain areas being in the red, but at a certain point,
Hmm.
you're not going to be able to level up while you're running in the red on a lot of the habits that you have. I'm just thinking in terms of like,
Hmm.
okay, you got to the point where you've got 5 employees and you're bringing in a pretty good amount of revenue and you can feel like you're really successful, but you're working 24 hours a day, you're not working out, you're eating poorly, and it's like you could sustain doing that for a long time for certain people without totally crashing and burning and other people recognizing the challenges that you have. But if you're going to grow your business anymore or you're going to spend time with your family, you're going to pursue being healthy, if you want to level up in any area of your life, all of a sudden you can't level up without changing your habits.
Yes. Yeah. Prime example. I was a enterprise account executive at a venture-backed unicorn startup back, a decade ago now, and I lived in the bottom half here, but incredibly successful at work, financially. Actually, had a really good marriage. I was a good dad, um, by general public standards, and what happened was I reached a point where my willpower and my effort could no longer make up for the gaps. And
Mm.
so I crashed really hard. I had burnout and I ended up needing to take a 2 month sabbatical to actually rest my soul in order to be like healthy mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, yeah, you name it. And from the outside looking in, everyone would have thought that like I was just killing it at life, and I was living in the red.
Okay, so we actually spent way more time on this kind of beginning part, but I think it's really important because this really does lay the foundation. Like you can think that you're doing great, but man, if we're gonna look at this using your rubric, I think most people have to recognize that they're going to pay later for the decisions they're making from habits that aren't great. So uh, maybe we can just go high level over this next question. But what does it take to rewire your brain? If you're even in the situation where you have inconsistent good habits and below, what are the steps to start making some of those changes and rewire your brain for good habits?
Yeah. Yep. So I've built something that I call the mission fit framework, and this is the plan of action for anyone that wants to develop lasting habits, lasting change. So a new you, no longer, hungry for the things that you were once doing, actually kind of defeating those essentially and replacing with better things in your life. And so there's three primary kind of like core buckets that I often talk about. And this actually came from my working theory of change, which is essentially knowledge plus practice plus community equals transformation. And so as you weave those together, there's things that happen as those intersect with one another, which I'll talk about. And then there's things that are accelerators that are on the outside edge, which accelerate that particular circle, if you will. So, from a knowledge standpoint, how do you accelerate getting the right knowledge around what to do? This is like a really key thing. So, you need some kind of intake system. You need a process that is going to deliver you the correct information, not just all knowledge, but the 20% of information that gives you the 80% of the results, right? Like if I put this 20% into practice, this is going to make massive movements for me. But then we also need feedback loops. So we need a process to have feedback that helps us refine our knowledge and say, well, this one's actually not that effective, and this isn't helping as much as I thought it would, and those kinds of things. In terms of practices, I say practices, that's, you could exchange this with habits. These are the behaviors that I do consistently. The two things that kind of reinforce healthy habits, in my opinion, is having a very specific daily routine, which is something that I have everybody do. And then regular micro habits means these are those big things where it's like, I want to become a runner. So what is the next big ticket thing that I'm going to start small with and begin to grow into as kind of a more macro piece of my daily rhythms or my daily practices? And then inside of community, aligned friendships. And so you can kind of see where these merge in the middle. If I don't have friendships with people who are aligned, we all have heard that old adage that you are the average of the 5 closest people around you. If I don't have people that are aligned with the direction that I'm going, that can provide me some kind of feedback loop and help me with optimization as I bounce ideas off of them, or I hear what they're doing, or I'm trying new things that they come up with that I hadn't thought of, then you end up with gaps there. And these all lead to the right kind of accountability, the right belief system, and the right optimization. And so if you see beliefs right there in the middle, this is a key component that I think everyone really needs to wrestle with. Up until like the 16th century, after the Renaissance, the word believe was universally accepted as being defined as a set of knowledge that was demonstrated by action. So I believed in this information enough that my life demonstrated it with action. And so to say you believed in something would always be intrinsically tied with action. If you don't act, then you don't actually believe, you just know. And we all have stuff like this in our lives. And essentially one of the ways I talk about this is it's the difference of going from head to heart. It's like, is this something that is a conviction that compels me? Or is it just something I know to be true based on information that I've learned? And having the right beliefs will always dictate the right actions. And if I pair that with accountability to those actions and optimizing those actions, that's where lasting change really comes from. So I would encourage everyone who's watching and listening to this to look at those outside 6 and give yourself a grade, green, yellow, red, based on how you're doing at each of those things. Do you have an intake system? And if you have an intake system, but you're inconsistent with following through on it, then I would put that as yellow or red. If you have a daily routine that you've been doing, again, for 8 months or more, green. If you don't, that's probably yellow or red. Micro habits, macro habits. Are you regularly introducing small versions of big changes that you want to make and then growing them? Do you have any kind of support and coaching? Do you have aligned friendships, people that are moving in the same direction as you, moving in the same direction as you want to go, I should say, not necessarily moving in the same direction as you currently are moving? So give yourself a green, yellow, or red grade on these as well.
Love it. There's a lot of good stuff there. I like pulling these 3 together: knowledge, community, and practices, because it is easy to fall into any one of those things, and the chances of success, like you're saying, if you don't have all 3, like you can do practices and have community, but if you don't know what you're doing, you're not going to be successful at it anyway, no matter how consistent you are. But also your chances of staying consistent if you're doing something incorrectly are very low, because you're never going to become competent enough to enjoy it or for it to become a habit, and you could have practices and knowledge, but if you don't have community, it's very difficult. I mean, there's a very small percentage of the population that has the ability and willpower to do something on their own long term without any community at all. I mean, it's like extremely rare. And even for those folks, there's going to be certain aspects of their life they're going to really struggle to have habits, even if they're really good at it, with certain things without community. And then obviously without putting things into practice, you can know everything. you can talk with other people about it, but if you're not going to actually put it into practice, you're not going to get anywhere. So I like that combination of those three things. One thing we talked, we could we're at 30 minutes. We could talk for probably like an hour on each one of these individual pieces. So I really want to dig into one that you focus on a lot with people who are starting out, and I think is really practical and relevant, which is your morning routines. So talk to me a little bit about why you believe morning routines are important to implement change, and then maybe just like a quick idea of what that could look like in practice.
Yeah. Um, I'll start with saying that I don't think the answer is morning routines in and of itself. So people listening might be thinking through stuff that they do regularly in the morning and struggling to kind of like connect the dots of like, well, how does that do things for me? So what I like to do is to design a micro habit morning routine. And I think what most people lack first and foremost is, again, laying the foundation. So what is the minimum viable amount of action that I can take in a particular area that will keep me moving in the right direction, even if it's the most minute baby steps? So as a Christian, I like to read the Bible every morning, and my clients do as well. But most people start with, well, I'm going to read for an hour in the morning, and like they do it for 2 days, and then one of their kids gets sick and they stay up late, and then they don't get up on time, and then boom, like they're off track, and it's 3 weeks before they do it again. And so, how do we develop a set of micro habits that help you to address all the areas of health at the same time, every single morning, 365 days a year, whether it's raining, whether it's you're on vacation, whether you have family in town that's visiting and disrupting all of your schedules, or you're sick, whatever it is. Like, how do we develop that? And that's where I start with, guys. And so what this looks like for me, and people can feel free to steal this. It's one of the 6 components, right? So it's necessary, but it's only one. And I designed this morning routine where when I first wake up, I just kind of come to the realization of like, hey, I'm not autonomous. So for me, I have a God that is kind of instructing, leading, and helping shape my life and my day. And so I start with just an awareness of like, okay, this day is not mine, it's a gift. And how am I going to use this time? How am I going to steward this time? I move over and I start the coffee pot. And while the coffee is getting ready, I actually will read a couple of verses in the Bible. This is usually 5 to 15 verses. It takes me like 3 minutes. And then I respond with a journal entry. So if you're not a Christian, you could have some kind of reading that you want to do that is stirring your soul, or helping build your mind, whatever it is. But respond with a journal entry. And the minimum viable amount for a journal entry, in my opinion, is 2 sentences. So I'm usually writing a question, an idea that jumped out to me, or a follow-up or a response, or something that I want to share with my family, any of those things. But it's just 2 sentences. And if you are having a really bad day, it's all about the mechanism, not the depth. So you could write 2 sentences and it could be, I don't want to do this and I'm in a bad mood today. That's great. You're following through on the actual action and the mechanism. And if you can do that every day for a year, this becomes entrenched in your behavior. And you're not going to have this perfect, profound depth every time you're writing something down or you're reading something. But the fact is, if you don't do those things regularly, you'll never have those profound moments. And so I go from the quick, 3 minutes of reading, 2-minute journal entry. I then do a bottleneck analysis for my business, and I recommend everybody does this. So most people create a task list, and then they pick their top 3 most important things to do today, and they've got all this stuff to do. And when you end the day, number one, you don't know if today was a success because the tasks never end. They're never done. And so emotionally, that keeps me from going and connecting with my family. And then when I lay my head down at night, I don't actually know if today was a success. And so I'm emotionally stirred. But if I go in and I say, what's the number one bottleneck in my business? And for a business person, this is going to live inside of leads. It's going to live inside of conversion of those leads, or it's going to live inside the delivery of the service, which includes customer experience, the actual product, the results that they get, the referrals that they give, all of that kind of stuff. So what category does it live in? And then what is the number one most important thing that I can do today? And so let's just say my number one problem, I have a client who runs a multi-generational septic business. And so let's say he's got a lead generation problem. And this isn't actually his problem, but I'm hypothetically, like, he's got a lead generation problem. And that's the biggest problem. And he's been working away at, chipping away at that for several weeks and making noticeable progress. And then one day, the hydraulic pump on their excavator breaks. And what now has become the biggest bottleneck in their business? It's that the piece of machinery that they use to dig septics with has broken, and they can't even service the existing clients that they have. So that just jumps everything to the top of the bottleneck list. And I need to pick the one next step that I can do to try to resolve that bottleneck. I'm not trying to resolve the entire thing. What's the next thing I can do? And that is, hey, I'm going to call the parts store and see if they have a new hose for the hydraulic pump. Great. Put that down on your list and then have that be the first thing that you do when you show up to work in the morning. And that process takes 2 minutes once you get good at it. You're just kind of thinking, what are the things going on in my business? What's most important? Okay, what's the next step I can take on that thing? And I write it down. So I've got 3 minutes of reading. I've got a 2-sentence journal entry. I've got a 2-minute bottleneck analysis. I do 25 push-ups. I hydrate with some water, and then I reward myself with my cup of coffee when it's done. And now I've addressed, mental and spiritual health. I've addressed emotional and relational health. I've addressed financial or like revenue health. Like, all of that's been done, and it's less than 15 minutes. And I can do this any day of the week, any day of the year, any location, any circumstances. And what I now have is something consistent that is moving every area of health in my life forward with very little effort, and I can build on it. Now the world is my oyster. And so let's say I did that in 15 minutes and it's 5:30 or 5:45 in the morning. Well, now I got lots of space. Do I want to read some more? Do I have lots of work to do and now I need to jump into work? Do I want to cook breakfast for my family because I've got time? Do I want to go get a workout in? But I've now done the minimum viable amount of all of those things. And now I can start to pick on bigger things that I might want to make progress on.
Yeah, that's huge, because like you're saying, if that's something that helps you at least be doing something in all of these important categories that you could actually consistently do for a year. Because to say, I mean, for me personally, to say I'm going to do an hour workout every day for the next year and I'm going to do that consistently, that's just, there's no way that it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Not even close. There's just so many other things going on in my life that I know that I'm not going to prioritize an hour workout 5 or 6 days a week consistently. But being able to incorporate doing 20 push-ups a day is at least getting me doing something. And then I found that when I do something like that, like, let's just use the push-ups as an example, it feels good to do push-ups. So then I'm going to be much more likely to increase the amount of workout that I'm doing from 0 to more than 20 push-ups, because it feels good to do 20 push-ups. And once I've done that, I've already kind of gotten my body moving, and I'm much more likely to go, hey, I want to start incorporating a 15-minute workout every day because I feel so much better when I do that, or, I read in scripture for these 20 verses and that feels really good. And I'm, feel like I'm much more connected to the Lord. I want to read 15 minutes a day and kind of up that, but it's something that once you get those base down, it's easier to build on those micro habits than it is to go, like we said, try to run a marathon and do something crazy. And it also helps you not get so out of whack in one area, because you could work out for an hour every day, but then you're going to be skipping other things that are on that list.
Yes.
And I think even doing a little bit of all those things helps you think through how to prioritize all of those different aspects and decide which one needs more attention while still making sure you're hitting on all of them. So
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I want to add to this really quick too. And just to clarify for everyone listening, I'm probably a little unique in this, but I have seen this to be profoundly powerful for me. That daily routine doesn't change for me. So even at my current state of habits, that 15 minutes still looks like that. Like my reading is still micro, my journal is still micro, my workout is still micro, my bottleneck analysis is still small, easy. And I think no matter how advanced you get and how successful you are with habits, you should have something like this that happens every single day of the year, no matter what. Because the reality is there's so many moving parts and life changes from season to season so much that it's nearly impossible for you to take something larger and do it for decades. We have to have the smaller, and as long as that's consistent and that's automatic, there's an identity that's being built in you as somebody who does these things, and you end
Mm,
up hungering for more. So if you're reading scripture every single day, or you're doing 25 push-ups every single day, like you were just talking about, there's a hunger that develops for more. But I'm not going to replace the micro for the macro. I'm going to do the micro every single day, and with the allotted space and time that my life provides me in that season, I'm going to prioritize how I then use the other space for more. So I did 15 minutes. I've still got 45 minutes left before the kids wake up. What's the most important thing for me to work on in this season? Well, I'm trying to get healthy and I'm trying to get fit. So I'm going to go work out and I'm going to do
mm.
an actual 30-minute workout, but that's not going to replace the 20 push-ups or the 25 push-ups. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I really like that idea because it keeps you from being completely derailed from
Yes.
that consistent habit. Because invariably, if you try to do something that's more than 15 minutes for all of those things combined, you're going to be on vacation and you're going to skip it, or you're going to,
Yeah.
you know, your kid's going to be up all night. And it's like, man, if my kid's been up all night, which my kids tend to hate sleeping, so it happens a lot, then, trying to do a 30-minute workout might not even be a good idea if I was up 3 quarters of the night. But doing 20 push-ups is something that I can still do. So I think it's a great way to do it where you're able to keep that consistency and then build on that. And then different seasons, like, man, maybe I want to get fit and I want to lose some weight, and that's important to me and my health, and I feel like that's something that I need. I might increase what I'm doing on that side and keep the other things the same. And you're going to cycle which habits you're going to focus on and probably swap things in and out, or your business is really busy during, like, oh, well, another example of where I think that'd be super valuable is if you work in a seasonal business. Like, I used to sweep chimneys, and it was August to December, like, well, really to like January 1st was nuts.
Yeah.
It was like 10, 12 hour days every day. And then the rest of the year, it was super chill. In fact, I didn't even work for that company. I just did essentially August to December to January every year. And my point in saying that is that's something that I could do when work is when I do have to work 10 or 12 hours a day.
Yes.
And then when I have the times where I'm not having to work like that, I can add in the other pieces, and because I tend to be like I think, sorry, I'm kind of rambling here, and I do want to finish, but
No,
I
this is
think this
good.
is doing something helpful for me while I'm just kind of thinking out loud about it, because I tend to be somebody who's goes really deep on something really fast. I make a ton of progress, and then I got to stop doing that and focus on other things. And I think there's a ton of value in that. But the challenge is it's very difficult for me to maintain habits that are good. Like, you and I were part of a group where we were doing a study on some books, and while we were doing that, I'm like spending an hour or two a day reading, and reading scripture, reading these books, engaging with this community. That's not something I could keep up all the time. But then what
Yeah.
tends to happen is then I finish that, and then I'm not doing any of that for like 3 months or 6 months, and I'm catching up on other things. And so I really like that idea of like, hey, I'm going to hit all these buckets, so I'm not just completely stopping. But
Yeah.
what's the number one factor that you see that determines whether someone will fail at creating these habits, and then what's the number one factor that you think it takes to really succeed at rewiring your brain and creating good habits?
Yeah. I think perspective is the number one thing in both parts. So like we've talked about it, or I guess hinted at it, referenced at it several times today, but uh, delayed gratification is so key. So having a lack of that is almost like an instant ticket to fail, right? What came to mind as you were talking earlier, one of the ways to articulate some of these things um, is the ideal our goal, or is the ideal our measuring stick? And if I'm in a current state and I'm measuring myself against the ideal, then I'm going to have this severe lack of delayed gratification. I'm going to be frustrated. I'm going to be disappointed. I'm going to have, it's just, my perspective is all off. If the ideal is my goal and I know that there's a pathway to get there, then I can have some delayed gratification, knowing that I'm moving there and that I'm taking the right steps and I'm having the right kind of progressive pathway to it. The number one, I would say, on the flip side, attribute of somebody who is successful is that they have a multi-generational vision. And once you recognize that your actions are one of the single greatest indicators of how your children will behave, and that it's the single greatest indicator of then how their children will behave, and so on and so forth, changing our actions becomes very important. And having a multi-generational vision, thinking like, okay, I know that what I do is actually setting up my family name for success or failure for generations. And I can disrupt a cycle that was given to me, or I can continue it. That becomes a huge motivator to create lasting change. And then the question becomes, okay, I have failed at this in so many ways and so many opportunities over the years. I've tried everything, it feels like, and I haven't been successful. And I would say most of the time that is rooted in I've been measuring myself against the ideal and I have been taking too big of steps. And now I can take a step back and think, okay, this isn't actually just about me. It's not just about me living a good life or me having, healthy habits or me feeling good and having energy and being strong and all that stuff. Although that's really good things, we want that and we really need to move towards that. Those are proxy benefits. I think the most important benefit is if you care about your children, more is caught than taught. And they are going to mimic your behavior. Every father out there can say, yeah, my kids always do stuff that I do. And sometimes it's the stuff I don't want them to do. And I'm like, oh, I know where that came from. That was me, that I yelled that way. And now they're yelling that way or whatever. And so that perspective, I think, is really, really grounding and foundational for building healthy habits and ultimately healthy long-term behaviors, is a long-term vision.
Yeah, and you can break those cycles, positive and negative, and so it's like you can have been given something and squander it, or
Yeah.
you can have been given something incredibly negative and be the last generation and that experiences that. And I mean, our culture really has taken a very short-term individualistic approach to uh, life, and it's
Yeah.
super destructive. Like, it actually doesn't lead to individual happiness. It might lead to individual, like, I don't even want to say success, but individual accomplishment, right? You can
Yeah.
accomplish some pretty amazing things when you just say, screw my spouse, screw my kids. I'm going to focus on me, what makes me happy, what's good for me. But it's very difficult to create healthy habits that actually empower our family if we're going to take that approach. So I totally agree with
Yeah.
you. And that does put into more perspective. It's like, okay, well, me waking up tomorrow morning to do something different, even a simple routine like this, if it's just on my willpower, that's pretty tough. But it's like, man, this is part of training my kids. This is part of discipleship. If I want to train my kids to use the gifts that God's given them successfully, I need to model that, and that's a totally different motivating factor than just like pure willpower for something. So I could be healthier when I'm 65. That's
Yeah.
like, it's pretty hard to stay motivated for your future
Totally.
self versus your future generations.
Yeah. One of the other ways to frame this would be, are you focused on accolades or are you focused on legacy? So, like, one great example is Billy Graham. And for those listening that know who Billy Graham was, he was the greatest evangelist in North America in the last like 2 centuries. Like incredible. Millions of people came to faith through his ministry efforts, but his family was an absolute disaster. He would leave on these trips for 6 or 8 months at a time and go do all of these ministry things. And he would get home and his kids don't even know who he is. They don't recognize him. He wasn't in their life. They weren't shaped by it. And now you look at the legacy that he left, and it was a destruction. It was a wake of dysfunction. His kids have no faith. There's like, drugs and disorder and all sorts of nastiness in their family as a result of him, in my opinion, pursuing, even though they were righteous, pursuing success or pursuing accolades rather than pursuing legacy. And it's, the question then becomes, what are you leaving in your kids rather than what are you leaving to your kids? Because I can build a business and I can have incredible financial success and I can leave all that money to them and it'll probably destroy them. Or I can create healthy habits, rhythms, household operations, a lifestyle design that is actually leaving a legacy or leaving a heritage in my children. And that changes absolutely everything.
Yeah, that's super powerful. Well, normally I try to keep these episodes a little bit short, but definitely didn't succeed at doing that today. But it's a good topic, so to round it out, because I have follow ups to what you're saying, but I'm gonna keep rolling because
Maybe we can do a part 2 sometime.
Yeah, well, we'll have to dive into more, but this is good and helpful for me to be thinking through things. And there's areas in my life that I really want to level up, and I'm thinking like, man, I really need to level up in some areas. But even looking at that scorecard, it's like I know there's some areas in my life that I'm majorly in the red, and if I'm really being honest, probably at the bottom or second rung uh, of that ladder. And then I'm looking at things that I want to level up on, and it's like if I'm being honest, I'm not going to level up in those areas I'm going to level up in unless I change my habits. And then to your point that you just made, like, man, if I'm exemplifying bad habits, even if I'm still look successful on the outside, I'm exemplifying things that are negative behaviors for my kids that are not going to produce fruit for them in the long run either. So super powerful stuff that you're sharing. What Okay, so you shared some great stuff that people can do on their own. Unfortunately, when I tried to post this link to the document in LinkedIn, it doesn't like it because I'm linking directly to a PDF, and they're probably trying to avoid people getting like viruses and whatnot. So there's no virus in this document. So if you want it, either reach out to me or Chris, and we can shoot it over to you. It's not so that you can get hounded or gating it. It's just because we don't have the delivery mechanism to get it out there. So
how about we do this? Type a comment in the post that says, I want it, if you want the PDF. Because I also, with this, I built a worksheet for you guys so you can go through and actually write in your evaluation to some of the things we talked about. And I would recommend doing this every 3 to 6 months and just giving yourself a scorecard of where am I, what's working, what's not, and things I need to do. So if you want this and all of the other stuff, just say I want it in the comments, and then either Joseph or myself will DM you the PDF just so that you can have it.
Awesome. Yeah. So reach out for that. And then what are, for people who go, hey, I like what you're talking about here, but shoot, I can't do this on my own. I see that community piece there, and the people I'm hanging out with are not going to be the right people to help me overcome these habits and work through these things. What are the programs that you offer, and how do people listening find out more about them?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. So I have one program that I offer, and it is a mastermind coaching experience where, and it's called Scale Up Fitness Academy. And we actually build all 6 of these things that you see as accelerators and focus on the 3 macros of knowledge, practice, and community. And it's all built into the program. And so there's a 6-month pathway that people go through to start small and build up as they change habits. Now, I am a health coach by trade, and so there's a heavy focus on if you want to optimize, nutrition and fitness and healthy routines and those kinds of things, and your sleep, and address that stuff, that's a huge part of it. But nothing lives in isolation. Nothing is mutually exclusive. And so we take a pretty holistic approach to health. And as a Christian, as a believer, I do this primarily with Christian CEOs, executives, entrepreneurs, business leaders, business owners, people who have, quite frankly, chaotic schedules. They struggle to do all these things. Life always feels like a game of whack-a-mole, where you're hitting one thing and shifting your focus, and then something else pops up over here, and you're constantly reacting to things. So I've built all of this pathway into a 6-month experience to help people absolutely transform their entire life and their body in that time period. Now, I will say, one of the things I love to do is I love to do strategy calls with people. And I do strategy calls for an hour with people absolutely free. And I help you kind of think through this framework and figure out what are the biggest things that you can be working on right now, and what are some ways that you can approach those. And then I send you away to go execute on your own. And the reason that I do that, and the reason I do it for free and spend so much time on that, is because I know that, 1 in 10 or 2 in 10 of the guys that do that are going to look at that and say, you know what, I actually really just want help with the execution of this. And I firmly believe that when you give away all the information, you give away everything that people need, then you reserve the right to charge for implementation if people need help or want help with that particular piece. So feel free on this document. There's a link here. You can go and book a call with me, and we'll do that. We'll strategize, and I'll give you all that you need to know in order to go execute this on your own. And for those of you who look at that when we're done and say, I actually really want help, then we can go that route. But it's not a sales call or anything like that. It really is a coaching call.
Love it, Chris. Yeah, well, thanks so much for joining me on the show today. Really appreciate it. You shared a lot of valuable stuff that I'm taking away from this, but I know that other people will really benefit from as well. So thank you so much, and hope to have you back on for another round in the not too distant future.
I love it. Thanks, Joseph. It was great being here. I appreciate everyone that's listening. And if you guys ever want to chat, you know who to come to for habits.